I never thought I'd be that parent, the one pushed aside after giving everything. For 37 years, I raised 2 children in the same house, where I now sit alone. The wallpaper faded, but my memory's sharp as glass. My name is Dorothy. I'm 68 years old, and until 6 months ago, I believed family loyalty was unshakable. I was wrong. The day I collapsed in my kitchen, clutching the counter as my left side went limp, everything I thought I knew about my children shattered like the coffee mug that slipped from my fingers. The stroke wasn't severe, the doctors said. I'd recover with therapy, regain most function, just needed time and support. Time I had. Support I thought I had. But when my son Marcus called from 2 states away, his words cut deeper than any physical pain I'd felt in that hospital bed. "Mom, we need to talk about long-term care facilities. Not how are you feeling. Not we'll help you through this. Just facilities like I was a problem to solve, a burden to relocate. My daughter Brenda visited once, spent 20 minutes scrolling her phone while I struggled to sip water through a straw. My speech slurred and humiliating. She left early for a yoga class, promising to return the next day. She didn't. The family betrayal I experienced in those vulnerable weeks taught me something cruel. Illness reveals who people truly are when caregiving becomes inconvenient. The risks were terrifying in ways I couldn't articulate to the therapists who visited my home 3 times a week. I wasn't just losing mobility in my left hand or struggling to form words without my tongue feeling thick and clumsy. I was losing my identity as the family matriarch, the woman who hosted every Thanksgiving for decades, who sewed Halloween costumes at midnight, who paid for Marcus's business school when the loans fell through. My house, this 3-bedroom ranch with the garden I planted in 1987, became my entire world because I couldn't drive anymore, couldn't walk to the mailbox without my cane catching on cracks in the sidewalk. The financial stakes felt suffocating. My retirement savings weren't endless, and the medical bills stacked up on the kitchen table like accusations. Brenda mentioned selling the house during one brief phone call, her tone casual, as if we were discussing weather, not erasing 40 years of my life. Marcus sent brochures for assisted living communities in Florida, places with cheerful names like Sunset Gardens and Golden Years Village, their glossy photos showing older people playing shuffleboard with forced smiles. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to be erased. The emotional toll cut even deeper than money. I'd wake at 3 in the morning in my old bedroom, the same room I'd shared with their father before cancer took him 12 years ago, and listen to the house settle, the familiar creaks and groans my only company. The smell of my morning coffee, once comforting, became a reminder of the independence I'd lost when lifting the pot required both hands and intense concentration. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from 1981, measured out my isolation in steady, relentless seconds. I'd touch the worn handle of my favorite teacup, the one with tiny roses Brenda gave me on Mother's Day when she was 9, and wonder how that little girl grew into a woman who couldn't spare an afternoon for her mother's recovery. Elder respect, the concept I'd been raised to honor, that I'd instilled in my own children, felt like a relic from another era, abandoned when caregiving required sacrifice instead of just empty words on greeting cards. But little did I know, the real shock was still coming. 3 weeks after my stroke, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Brenda had stopped by finally to drop off groceries, just bags on the counter, no unpacking, no staying. I was in the bathroom, moving slowly with my walker, when I heard Marcus's voice through her speakerphone in the kitchen. She must have thought I couldn't hear, or maybe she didn't care anymore. "We need to move fast on the house, Bren," Marcus said, his businessman tone sharp and calculated. "The market's good right now. If we can get Mom into a facility by end of month, we can list it by September, split the equity before property values dip." My daughter's response made my breath catch. "I already talked to that realtor, the one who sold the Henderson's place. She thinks we can get $420, maybe $450 if we stage it. Mom doesn't need all this space anyway. She can barely manage the bedroom." They were planning my life like a transaction, dividing assets while I was still living in them. The hidden family secret I discovered that day wasn't about money, though. It was about a shared Google document Brenda accidentally left open on my laptop when she was helping me check email the week before. I found it later that evening, my curiosity overriding my usual respect for privacy. The document was titled Mom Transition Plan, and it detailed everything. Timelines for moving me out, estimated costs for estate sales, even a breakdown of which furniture each of them wanted. Marcus had claimed my husband's vintage record collection and the dining table his grandmother built. Brenda wanted the china cabinet and my jewelry, specifically my mother's engagement ring I'd promised her years ago, but apparently wasn't moving fast enough to hand over. But the line that broke something fundamental inside me was in the notes section. Mom's resistance is expected. Cognitive decline post-stroke may require legal intervention if she refuses care placement. Consult elder law attorney Ray, power of attorney options. They thought I was losing my mind. They were preparing to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate with their plan to erase my independence and liquidate my life. The psychological insight hit me like another stroke. This wasn't about my health at all. This was about their convenience, their inheritance, their impatience with a mother who'd become an inconvenience in their upwardly mobile lives. The guilt I carried about burdening them transformed into something harder and clearer: anger. But it was anger paired with ancient grief, the recognition that my children had become strangers, motivated by greed rather than love, viewing their aging mother as a problem to solve rather than a person to honor. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the document glowing on the screen, and made a decision. If they wanted to play games with my life, I'd show them exactly how sharp my mind still was. The comeback I planned would require patience, intelligence, and the kind of dignified confrontation I'd never imagined needing with my own blood. The next morning, I called my old friend Patricia. We'd worked together for 23 years at the county clerk's office before I retired. Her voice was warm and concerned when I explained what I'd discovered, and within 2 days, she connected me with her nephew, an elder law attorney named Thomas, who specialized in exactly these situations. Thomas visited my home on a Wednesday afternoon, professional and kind, without being patronizing. He listened as I showed him the Google document, as I explained the overheard conversation, as I detailed every subtle and overt pressure my children had applied since my stroke. His response was measured but clear. "Dorothy, you're cognitively intact. Your medical records show expected recovery. What your children are planning could constitute financial exploitation if they proceed without your genuine consent. We can protect you." We spent 3 hours that day building what Thomas called a preemptive protection plan. First, I updated my power of attorney documents, removing both Marcus and Brenda, replacing them with Patricia as my healthcare proxy and Thomas's firm as my financial executor. Second, I created a revocable living trust, placing my house and assets into protected legal structure that prevented anyone from forcing a sale without my explicit approval. Third, and this was the part that felt both empowering and heartbreaking, I documented everything: the phone calls, the Google document, the conversations overheard, creating a legal record of their behavior. But the real turning point came when Thomas suggested something I hadn't considered. "You should consider showing them you're more capable than they believe. Rebuild your independence visibly. Let them see their assumptions were wrong." That advice became my mission. I doubled down on physical therapy, pushing through the frustration when my left hand refused to grip, when my words slurred during speech exercises. My therapist, a patient woman named Sandra, noticed the change immediately. "You're working like someone with somewhere to be," she said one morning, as I completed walking exercises without the walker for the first time. She was right. I had somewhere to be, back in control of my own life. Within 6 weeks, I was driving again. Short trips at first, then longer. I started attending a stroke recovery support group at the community center, meeting other survivors who shared their own stories of family abandonment and personal reclamation. One man, 72 years old, had been written off by his kids after a heart attack, only to outlive their predictions by a decade, and counting, running a small online business from his apartment. His story fueled my determination. I began volunteering at the local library's literacy program, working with immigrant families twice a week, proving to myself and anyone watching that my mind was intact and my purpose undimmed. The old routines that had felt like prison sentences, the slow morning coffee, the careful navigation of my home, became rituals of resilience rather than reminders of limitation. But I didn't tell Marcus or Brenda about any of this. Let them think I was declining. Let them build their plans on false assumptions. The confrontation I was preparing required them to underestimate me completely. The moment came on Thanksgiving. I'd told both children I wanted them home for the holiday, framing it as a family meeting about my care, exactly what they'd been pushing for. Marcus flew in from Seattle. Brenda drove from 2 hours away, both arriving at my house on Thursday morning with barely concealed impatience. They expected a diminished mother, ready to sign papers and accept her fate. Instead, they found the dining table set with the china they'd planned to divide. A full turkey dinner I'd cooked myself with adaptations but no assistance, and 2 manila envelopes placed at their seats. Marcus walked in first, his expression flickering between surprise and suspicion when he saw the spread. "Mom, you shouldn't have done all this. You're supposed to be resting." Brenda's eyes went straight to the envelopes. "What's this?" I sat at the head of the table, my table in my house, my voice steady and clear after months of speech practice. "Those are copies of the documents you created about my future, the transition plan, the attorney consultations, the furniture distribution list. I thought we should discuss them openly since you've been planning my life behind my back." The silence was profound. Marcus's face went pale, then flushed red. Brenda looked at her brother with panic and rising anger, a silent accusation passing between them. "Mom, that's not—" Marcus started. I held up my hand, the left one, the one they'd assumed would stay weak forever, now steady as I gestured for silence. "I'm not finished. Inside those envelopes you'll also find copies of my updated legal documents. Neither of you has power of attorney anymore. Neither of you can force me into a facility or sell my house. My assets are in a trust that I control, with independent executors who actually have my best interests at heart." Brenda's voice came out sharp and defensive. "You're not thinking clearly, Mom. We're trying to help you. You can't live here alone after what happened." The confrontation I'd been building toward for months crystallized in that moment. I stood up slowly, deliberately, walking around the table without my cane, my gait slightly uneven but strong. I had a stroke, not a lobotomy. My mind is perfectly clear. Clear enough to see that you both view me as an obstacle to your inheritance rather than a mother worth caring for. Clear enough to hear you planning to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate. Clear enough to know the difference between help and exploitation. Marcus tried a different approach, his businessman negotiation tactics surfacing. "Mom, this is extreme. We can talk about this. The plan was just preliminary, just us trying to figure out options." I picked up a folder I'd placed on the sideboard, pulling out printed pages. "These are statements from my medical team, my neurologist, my physical therapist, my primary care physician, all confirming I'm cognitively intact, recovering well, and fully capable of independent living with minimal support. These are also records of every phone call you didn't make, every visit you cut short, every time you prioritized your convenience over my recovery." The power dynamic had completely shifted and they both felt it. Brenda's eyes filled with tears, guilt, anger, embarrassment. I couldn't tell and didn't particularly care in that moment. "We're your children. We deserve to be involved in these decisions." My response was quiet but absolute. "You're my children, but you stopped acting like it when I became inconvenient. You want involvement. It's earned through presence, through respect, through seeing me as a person instead of an asset to manage. You've done none of those things. The astute strategy I'd employed, the months of quiet preparation, the legal fortifications, the physical recovery they'd assumed impossible, had positioned me exactly where I needed to be, in control, not through aggression or revenge, but through dignified self-advocacy and the wisdom I'd earned in 68 years of life." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You're being manipulated by someone, probably that attorney. This isn't you." I met his eyes, my voice carrying a strength that surprised even me. This is exactly me. This is the mother who protected you your entire life, now protecting herself. The difference is, you never had to notice the protection before because it didn't inconvenience you. Now it does, and you can't handle it. The moral victory wasn't in their discomfort, though watching their assumptions crumble held a certain bitter satisfaction. The true victory was in reclaiming my autonomy, in refusing to accept their narrative that aging and illness made me disposable. The elegance I'd maintained throughout, no shouting, no dramatics, just truth and documentation, left them with no ground to stand on. Brenda tried once more, her voice small. "What do you want from us?" I returned to my seat, gesturing to the meal I'd prepared. "I want you to eat dinner with your mother. I want you to acknowledge what you've done. And then I want you to decide if you're capable of being actual family, or if you're just here for the inheritance. Because one of those relationships I'm interested in rebuilding. The other, I've already moved past." We sat in heavy silence for long minutes before Marcus finally grudgingly took his seat. Brenda followed. The dinner was awkward, punctuated by stilted conversation and long pauses, but it was honest in a way our relationship hadn't been in months. I'd confronted them with dignity, armed with truth rather than rage, and they had no defense except to face what they'd become. The empowerment I felt wasn't about defeating my children. It was about refusing to let anyone, even them, reduce me to a burden when I was still fully capable of writing my own story. That night, after they left with mumbled excuses and promises to think about things, I sat in my quiet house, the Thanksgiving dishes washed and put away, and felt something I hadn't felt since before the stroke. Pride. Not pride in what they'd become, but pride in who I'd remained despite their betrayal. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway, marking time I'd reclaimed as my own. In the weeks that followed, the dynamics shifted slowly but unmistakably. Marcus sent a long email 3 days after Thanksgiving. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that he'd mishandled the situation and made assumptions about your capacity that were wrong. It was corporate speak for "I'm sorry," but coming from my son, who'd spent 20 years in business, it was as close to vulnerability as he knew how to express. He asked if we could talk, really talk, about my recovery and what support I actually needed versus what he decided I needed. We had that conversation on a Sunday afternoon via video call, and for the first time in months, he asked questions instead of making pronouncements. Brenda's journey back was harder. She showed up at my door 2 weeks later, unannounced, her eyes red from crying. She'd brought the Google document printout, folded and worn as if she'd read it many times. "I don't know how to make this right," she said, standing on my porch like a stranger afraid to enter. "I got so caught up in managing everything, in being efficient, that I forgot you were a person, not a project. Mom, I'm ashamed." We sat in my living room for hours that day, talking in ways we hadn't since she was a teenager, bringing me her heartbreaks and fears. She admitted the pressure she felt to handle things as the local child, the resentment that had built when caregiving looked like it might disrupt her carefully planned life, the fear of watching me decline that made her want to control outcomes before they controlled her. None of it excused what she'd done, but hearing the human struggle behind the betrayal softened something in me. Understanding isn't the same as forgiveness, but it's a starting place. The family respect I demanded came slowly, in small gestures rather than grand declarations. Marcus started calling weekly just to talk, asking about my volunteer work and my recovery milestones without any agenda. Brenda began visiting on Saturdays, sometimes bringing her kids, my grandchildren who'd been mysteriously absent during my illness. We'd garden together, my granddaughter helping me plant bulbs for spring, while Brenda weeded alongside us. The physical work covering the awkwardness that still lingered. They didn't get their power of attorney back. I kept Patricia and Thomas in those roles, a boundary I maintained not out of punishment, but out of protection, for myself and honestly, for them. Removing the financial entanglement removed the temptation, letting us rebuild relationship without the corruption of inheritance hanging over every interaction. The satisfaction wasn't in their contrition, though their efforts to rebuild mattered. The satisfaction was in knowing I'd stood up for myself when it would have been easier to accept their version of my decline. The closure came not from their validation, but from my own recognition that I'd survived their betrayal and emerged more certain of my worth. I'd learned what many older people discovered too late, that enabling family exploitation in the name of keeping peace only deepens the wound, that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept mistreatment, even from your own children. My physical recovery continued past their predictions. 6 months after the stroke, I was driving confidently, cooking full meals, volunteering 3 days a week, and living independently in the house they'd tried to sell out from under me. The left side weakness became manageable. My speech fully recovered, my mind sharper than ever, sharpened perhaps by the necessity of protecting myself. I joined a support group specifically for elders who'd experienced family financial exploitation, sharing my story and hearing dozens of others. The epidemic of adult children who view aging parents as burdens or ATMs is more common than anyone wants to admit, hidden behind closed doors and family shame. But talking about it, naming it, creates accountability. I even started writing about my experience, short essays I shared in the stroke recovery newsletter, hoping someone else might recognize the warning signs I'd missed until almost too late. The lessons I learned cut deep into assumptions I'd held my entire adult life. I'd believed unconditional parental love guaranteed reciprocal loyalty. I'd assumed my children would naturally honor the sacrifices I'd made. I'd thought being a good mother meant never drawing hard lines with my kids. All of those beliefs crumbled when tested by my vulnerability, revealing harder truths. Love must be mutual to be sustainable. Honor is earned through action, not lineage, and boundaries are expressions of self-respect, not selfishness. The autonomy I reclaimed wasn't about rejecting family. It was about refusing to disappear into their convenience. Now I sit in my living room on quiet evenings, the grandfather clock ticking its familiar rhythm, my teacup warm in both hands that work again through effort and determination. The wallpaper is still faded, the house still filled with 40 years of memories. But I'm still here, still the author of my own story. My children are learning to be part of that story again, but on terms that respect my dignity rather than erase it. And if they can't, if the relationship we rebuild is smaller and more distant than what we had before, I've made peace with that too, because I'd rather live alone with my self-respect intact than surrounded by family who sees me as a burden. In the end, I learned that respect isn't demanded, it's earned, and sometimes the hardest person to earn it from is yourself when you're standing up to the people you love most. Recovery isn't just physical therapy and speech exercises. It's recovering your right to be seen as fully human, even when your body or circumstances change. It's recovering your voice when others try to speak over you. It's recovering your story when others try to write your ending before you're finished living. The empowerment didn't come from legal documents or confrontations at Thanksgiving dinner, though those were necessary tools. It came from the quiet decision, made alone in my kitchen 6 months ago, that I would not be erased. That decision, to fight for my autonomy with intelligence and dignity, to refuse the role of helpless elder they'd assigned me, to document and protect and assert my worth. That decision saved my life in ways far more profound than the stroke doctors who kept my heart beating. I'm 68 years old. I had a stroke. My children called me a burden and tried to liquidate my life. And I'm still here, still standing, still writing my own story. The comeback wasn't about shocking them, though their surprise was undeniable. The comeback was about shocking myself, discovering reserves of strength and clarity I didn't know I possessed until survival required them. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, dismissed as a burden when you needed support most, or watched your children view you as an obstacle rather than a person? Have you ever had to fight for your right to dignity when vulnerability made you easy to exploit? Because if this story resonates with you, if you've experienced that particular heartbreak of family betrayal during illness or aging, know this: your worth isn't determined by your physical capacity or your convenience to others. Your story isn't over until you decide it is. And sometimes the most revolutionary act an older person can commit is simply refusing to disappear when everyone around them has already written them off. That refusal, that insistence on being seen and respected and heard, that's not stubbornness, that's survival. That's the comeback they'll never see coming because they've already decided you're too weak to fight. Prove them wrong. I did. This is fictional drama created for entertainment, not a real personal account. While it explores authentic themes of family exclusion, boundary setting, and elder empowerment, the characters, situations, and events are entirely invented for narrative purposes. This story is designed to resonate emotionally with audiences who have experienced family conflict while maintaining complete transparency about its fictional nature.